Cinema, get it? So that there is Vanna White when she's not spinning the wheel. Now that I have your attention, because of your prurient interest, as Derek Higgins says, cheers. So, after much work yesterday, I recorded a lengthy and edited a lengthy video on the second part of my movie book collection. My computer did not cooperate. Numerous attempts to get that to process crashed the computer. I'm going to have to start over, and we're just going to have to go through them fast. All the humor and insight and personality of that video will be lost forever. So we're just going to do the truncated version now, a refilm of that. Very quickly, picked up this videotape VHS from Half Price Books today. I'll put it down here because it's hard to see. This is Thousands Cheer, 1943 MGM musical with Gene Kelly and a cast of thousands, and also Katherine Grayson, the warbling soprano of the time, who was really pushed by the studio. I think MGM was trying to have their own Deanna Durbin, kind of the charming ingenue type, but Katherine Grayson was a pretty bland one, and Deanna Durbin actually had humor and personality. She was a big star over at Universal. Anyway, so, you know what? I've seen all the MGM musicals, but I probably have seen parts of this one, but I have no recollection of it. So this was $1, and it's in impeccable condition. Now, I can see this on DVD or anything else, of course, but there is a charm to having something like this in my retro VHS collection. It's in really great shape, and you know, it's sort of from the Turner Classics era. You know, it's one of those made in World War II, rah-rah, hooray for Uncle Sam extravaganzas that all the studios were making at this time. So this is what they look like on the shelf, and this is what they look like off. Okay, we'll start with Film Follies by Stuart Claywans. This is a wonderful essay book about movies that were kind of big-scale follies, visionary movies that were either successful or not, but he goes deep into the subject. It's mind-massaging, it's multi-thematic. This is really one of the great essay books on cinema that you should get hold of. Grand Design, Hollywood is a Modern Business Enterprise by Tino Ballio, 1930 to 1939. This is part of a 10-book series. They all have this silver gray look to them. This is one of the greatest film book series ever published. This one in particular is one I'm really interested in because this is the golden age of Hollywood. This goes into territory that most people who discuss film don't talk about. The business itself, the industry, the exhibition, the distribution, what was going on in the ground, in the theaters, but also what was going on in the studios. This is solid stuff, and it's very readable. It's great. One of the best ever done. This is one I failed to mention before. It's on the top shelf. Retakes, Behind the Scenes of 500 Classic Movies by John Eastman. There's lots of books like this out there. This is one of the better ones, I think. It's very compact, and it has a lot of good stories in it. So, you know, if you're looking for something along these lines, this is a really good version. The Movies is Medium by Louis Jacobs. Louis Jacobs was a very accomplished film scholar, did a lot of books on the subject. This is a good basic sort of college textbook overview of concepts of movie, like time and editing and how to construct a narrative. In other words, bread and butter stuff here, and of course he goes over some classic examples. So we got 2 erotic cinema books, Cut, The Unseen Cinema, and Cinema, The Erotic Adventures in Film by Douglas Brody. Cinema, get it? So anyway, yeah, I did kind of a humorous take on my last attempt at this, and I'm not going to do that this time. Suffice it to say that these books are true to the subject. Now we have one of the greatest film books of them all, Caligari's Cabinet and Other Grand Illusions, A History of Film Design by Leon Barsac. Barsac was himself a great film set designer. He did the sets for the 1945 French classic Children of Paradise, and he worked in Hollywood as well. And this is kind of the foundational text on set design and production design in movies. This was published in the United States in 1976. The original French was in 1970. We got Richard Abels' The Cinema Goes to Town, French Cinema, 1896 to 1914. This is a hefty and impeccably researched book on the history of early French cinema, when French cinema was the Hollywood of the world. Gaumont, Eclair, and Pathé Studios all had facilities around the world, and when World War I hit, of course, that changed the game, and Hollywood became dominant. Charlie Chaplin rose at that same time, so that kind of put the nail in the coffin. There's no better book, really, on the subject than this. If you're really interested in the early cinema, which you ought to be, if you want to really be an expert in this kind of stuff. Hollywood Directors, 1914 to 1940 by Richard Korzarski. Korzarski is a fairly prolific writer on cinema. Again, it is what it is. You get little write-ups for each of the important directors of this era, at least as selected for this book. There's quite a few, actually, and some other little extras in there that make it very interesting, compelling. Not a common book to run across, though. This was an Oxford Press book. Now, this is not necessarily a film book, but it is film adjacent, and of course these two people were great film stars as well as great Shakespearean stage actors. Richard Burton and John Gielgud. This was John Gielgud's directorial staging of Hamlet starring Richard Burton in 1964. This was filmed. You can watch it on YouTube. It was written by a guy, Richard Stern, an actor who was in the production, and he observed this production very carefully and gives great insights. I've read some of this book. It's really fascinating. Now, a favorite of mine, Sex and Zen and A Bullet in the Head, The Essential Guide to Hong Kong's Mind-Bending Films. This covers that golden period of Hong Kong cinema of the 80s and 90s. I saw virtually all of these movies. When this book came out, I was really into this type of movie. You have, the genre kind of bending movies of Hong Kong. They kind of like Bollywood in India. They throw everything in the kitchen sink in these films, and they're highly entertaining. The big names are all in here. John Woo, Chow Yun-fat, Jackie Chan, Michelle Yeoh, Ching Mi Yao, etc. All the stars and directors who made this a very energetic cinema. The presentation is great. And there's this funny thing in here called hex errors, where they talk about the bungled subtitles translations and how funny they are. So yeah, that's that. If you're interested in Hong Kong cinema, this is really a book you ought to have. Here's one of the great classics of cinema bookdom, From Caligari to Hitler, A Psychological History of the German Film by Siegfried Kracauer. This was published in 1948. It goes deep into the early cinema of Germany, especially the 1920s expressionistic cinema, and also the psychological currents and undercurrents that sort of led to Nazism. It's very deep stuff, and it's pretty classic. It's, as far as I'm concerned, never been out of print. It's always been an essential work. AMC Classic Movie Companion, more than 5,000 entries. This is the American Movie Classics Film Guide. Back when American Movie Classics actually showed classics and was great, back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Basically, it's just a listing of movies, many of which were shown on AMC, and, it's basically plot summaries. Not a lot of judgment here. It's just a basic guide, and it's kind of a relic. It's a nice little relic to have from that golden period of AMC. Farber on Film, the complete film writings of Manny Farber. This is one of two books that I have featuring the writings of the film critic and scholar Manny Farber. He was one of the most intelligent and mind-massaging and thought-provoking film critics who ever lived. His heyday was kind of in the 70s. He says a lot of things that might be contrarian to popular opinion. He's really a fascinating read. Gives you a lot to think about movies that maybe you think you know, but maybe don't know as much as you do. This is his collected writings, so this is kind of essential if you're interested in really highly thought-provoking film criticism. Now we have one that most people know of. Ephraim Katz's The Film Encyclopedia. It is exactly what it says it is. It's a massive, enormous film encyclopedia, and this was kind of considered the gold standard of its time. This first came out in the 80s. I remember it was a little controversial. A lot of people thought it excluded too many things, but it became very well used and admired. Roger Ebert really depended on this for film information. He said so in some interview, I remember. And it's huge. And I have to admit, I don't use it much because it's redundant of other books that I have. But I think a film collection, a proper film collection, will have at least one copy of this. Now this here, The Hollywood Story by Joel W. Findler, is one of the greatest of all books on history of the movies. And in many ways, this has never been surpassed. He goes deep into the Hollywood studios, deep into the statistics. This is just chock full of facts, impeccably well researched, a complete experience. Just, there's nothing like it. It's pretty peerless. I have 2 editions of the TLA movie and video guide. I have the 2004 and the 2002-2003 editions. These are very attractive guides. They're basically, they select the cream of the crop. It's not like Leonard Maltin where you're going to have a variety of movies, good and bad, or indifferent or mediocre or average. These are pre-selected to only have the best movies in them. So the fact that they kind of rate them with stars is a little redundant. You know, when you're getting the cream of the crop or the top 1% of art movies, it seems a little silly to actually rate them at that point, but they do. It has this nice indexing feature, alphabetical indexing feature. It's very attractive. The judgments are generally standard and reliable. Here's a classic, the Golden Turkey Awards by Michael and Harry Medved. This was back when the idea of bad movies as a pursuit in film fandom was less of a thing. So this was kind of at the forefront of that. Of course, nowadays on YouTube and everywhere else, bad movies have become a huge cottage industry for people. It's led to a lot of bad film criticism, in my opinion. But this was fun in its day. I guess this came out in the early 80s, late 70s. There was also a Son of sequel to this that I don't have. I think I owned it at one time. Unfortunately, Michael Medved ended up being a religious nut on Fox News, so... This is The Magnificent Ambersons, a reconstruction, basically the film script of The Magnificent Ambersons, Orson Welles' adaptation of the Booth Tarkington novel, which I read. It's a 1918 Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. I think I got the first Pulitzer Prize, if I'm not mistaken. So this is an attempt to show all the parts that were cut out of the final notoriously cut film. It's still a masterpiece, and I love that movie. My ex-girlfriend thought it was better than Kane, and I understand why, because it's very literary. But that's a pretty unique item to have. The Empire Film Guide. It's as big as the Empire itself. Look at that. So again, this is very much like the TLA guide. It picks the best of movies and rates them and gives reviews and summaries of them. Very typical kind of film guide. This is a nice one though, very attractive. Still have it in pretty good shape. Here's one that many of you will be familiar with and fondly remember, the Video Hound's Golden Movie Retriever. This is a 1997 edition. I had 2 other editions. I sold them because having this in my bookshelf takes up a lot of room. And I'm not keen on the reviews themselves. They're kind of ordinary, and they almost seem like they were just stolen from other film guides. And it has the 4-3 bones rating system, whatever, which is kind of a gimmick. In the back, though, these cross-referenced film subject categories are very useful. Like if there's a movie about dogs or about bandits or whatever, you just look under those and you see all the movies that were made by that subject. Lots of stuff like that back here that make it actually very useful. Now the Internet Movie Database has a key reference system too. You can go in there and look at tags and see what movies follow under those tags. But that has become hard to find on their website and harder to use, and it takes a little time. It might be more complete, but this, believe it or not, is a lot easier. It's a lot easier to just grab this off the shelf and just go to the page. The famous film critic Pauline Kael, big in the 60s and 70s and 80s. This is one of several compendium volumes of her reviews that was published. This is probably the most common one to find, 5001 Nights at the Movies. It has an enormous number of her reviews in here, and not something I look at very much, but I'm kind of glad to have that. Now we've got a really unique and invaluable book. This is called The Movies in the Age of Innocence by Edward Wagenknecht. This was a guy who was a film fan way back in the early days of cinema. He went to the movies back around World War I, the silent era. He was very familiar with the movies and stars of that era, Mary Pickford and so on. And this is a unique reminiscence of a guy who was very observant about that era, and it really gives you a sense of what it was like to love those movies and those stars at that time, and he has a really great sense of the aesthetic of those movies. Really no other book in existence like this. If you want to have a good silent movie book reference, you got to have this one. The Art of the American Cinema by Charles Hyam. I haven't really delved into this one. It's a good overview of the history of American cinema in the Golden Age. I only read one other book by Hyam, his biography of Orson Welles. It was a very catty biography, but it was fun. I got rid of it because I've got other Orson Welles bios. This is one of the most unique, and to me, one of the greatest of all cinema books. The Compound Cinema, selected, arranged, and introduced by Louis Jacobs. This is the film writings of Harry Allen Potamkin. Potamkin was an obscure film critic back in the 1920s. He wrote for a lot of different little specialty publications, a lot of leftist publications that are obscure. Jacobs pursued and compiled those into this book, which is a real labor of love. Potamkin was one of the most intelligent and perceptive writers of cinema of his time, and this is a really unique collection. I love this book. There's a unique backstory on how I found this book in the most unlikely place. My family and I were vacationing near Pensacola, near the border of Alabama and Florida, near Gulf Shores, Alabama. There was a shopping center, a strip center right off the beach. Had a bookstore there, and they had piles of this book sitting there, and I'm like, why is this book here? Like, this is like very esoteric for a beach bookstore to be having. They must have got a good deal on it. So I bought one, and after retrospect, I wish I had bought more. I think I only paid like maybe $3 for this. I should have bought like a stack. But yeah, this is an incredible book, and Potamkin was a communist. He had a blind spot toward the Soviet Union, like many leftists at this time did. I don't think it ruins his criticism as long as you can see where it intercedes, but doesn't invalidate the intelligence of the critiques that he has in here. These are very dense and very perceptive, and as long as you understand the biases of Potamkin, and his biases don't invalidate the very pertinent points that he makes, especially about the capitalist influence and, quite frankly, the propaganda of that in popular entertainment and the cinema. He points those out very well. The funny thing about this book is it is the heaviest book in my collection. It is super heavy. It's as heavy as 3 bricks. They used the heaviest paper stock I've ever seen in a book in this. It seems to be made to withstand nuclear attack. You could use this to exercise with. It's amazing archival stock. And now another particular favorite that I've used many, many times, the Faber Companion to Foreign Films. Foreign being, of course, not American. And very well presented, nice capsule reviews, very astute judgments on classic foreign movies through the ages, up through probably the 1980s. Very well selected, just very well done all the way around. I have used this many times. It's a well-worn book for me. If you want a really good, compact overview of the international cinema and key titles, this is one definitely to have. Now this is one of the most used books in my library, as you can see from the many pieces of paper I've stuffed in there to mark things that I've been referring to. This is George Sedul's Dictionary of Film. This was published, I don't know, this is the English translation that was done by Peter Morris around 1970, I guess. He added some English-speaking, more contemporary movies to the guide. Sedul goes way back. He went back to the silent days, World War I. He saw films that are now lost. So some of his views in here are very valuable just for some of the things he saw that we can no longer see. This book is a condensation of a gigantic work that George Sedul did at mid-century. He wrote a gigantic multi-volume history of the cinema, probably the first of its kind ever done. It was never translated into English, only in French. Some libraries have it. My local university library had this, and I actually referred to it when I was doing some film research years ago. Even though my fluency in reading French is limited, I was still able to glean a lot of information out of that book, especially the lists that were in the book of obscure films that we don't talk about anymore. These are great. These are capsule reviews with lots of credits and lots of ancillary information on tons of movies from around the world. Sadul's perspective is unique. This is really one you ought to have. There's also a blue book that goes along with it, which is kind of an encyclopedia. I find that one a little superfluous. This is the one really to have, the red one. Sorry about that being so rapid fire. That was the quick and dirty version. I had to do it that way because my previous attempt at part 2 just failed in the editor. I must have made like 500 cuts and it just couldn't handle it. So I'm just trying to show you the books, and there'll be a part 3. Thank you.